The main character's name is Nia Polly, and her daily life is school courses and extracurricular activities, after which she returned home. But each time she absolutely did not understand why she should do so many things and what she could become in the end. Because of her ignorance, the protagonist found herself on a tower in the middle of her city with a marvelous view, and looking at it all, she admitted to herself that Nia Polly decided to quit high school and feels much lighter now. Because looking at such landscapes really makes her want to live and act, and she feels her anxiety gradually disappearing, and she can gradually cope with her burden and recognize to herself that her efforts are absolutely worthless. So everything that has been done before is absolutely useless. But in 10 minutes after these thoughts, and the world will be completely destroyed. The main character, looking at the picture of destruction, did not understand, did she really get into a manhwa with the genre of romance? But her shock didn't last long, because a moment later, when she was flying from the ruined building, she noticed a huge dragon that was bloodily crushing the entire city. In this regard, Nia Polly was really shocked and couldn't believe her eyes. When the girl was flying down, all she thought about was that she had no chance to save herself, as there was nowhere to run, and before she lost consciousness, the main character regretted that she had turned off her phone, wishing to be alone. But suddenly, to her shock, after a while, she opened her eyes and found that although she had luckily survived, the world around her had already been completely destroyed. But suddenly, behind the back of the protagonist sounded, and so she turned around in a panic, thinking that there were still some survivors. But then she noticed the phone that was lying near the hand of a dead passerby. Nia Polly was shaking at the sight of it all and realized she was wrong. But then the news came on and said that there was an unknown disaster that was sweeping the world. And it's not just any ordinary typhoon or landslide, because if you look at the video, the disruptions look like moments from a sci-fi movie, as if it were an invasion of an invisible creature. Nia Polly was frantically trying to turn her phone back on and didn't understand why the anchor woman was saying such nonsense. Because she saw everything that was happening, and the culprit was a silver-white dragon that had decided to destroy the whole world. The protagonist, in a panic, tapped herself on the head and forced herself to wake up as soon as possible, because she still did not believe that everything that was happening could be true, for which she could not be blamed because everything looked insanely unrealistic. The voice of a beautiful silver-haired girl, who touched the main character and was surprised that she could see them, then said that she had been looking for this girl for a long time, as she was the chosen one. Then she smiled brightly. Nia Polly introduced herself. This girl's name was Idea, and the dragon she saw in front of her was actually her younger brother Israel. Nia Polly, excited looking at the girl in front of her, thought about the fact that she looked like a goddess, and it all seemed completely unreal to the girl. But after Idea, to the protagonist's shock, informed her that the dragon is actually invisible to everyone else, and she's the only one who can see it. Then excitedly grabbed her hand and tearfully told her that her brother had been bewitched, and then asked that the chosen one help her. But then she immediately calmed down and winked at the girl and told her that if she refused, her world and the girl's world would be on the verge of extinction. Tan was so shocked to realize that she was actually given absolutely no election, so she had to agree, and in a blink of an eye, a contract was made between Nia Polly and Idea. So the magic of the goddess enveloped Polly in a blue glow, and so she flew insanely far away to a time before the world was destroyed, and also before it all happened, and ended up in the world of the past. While the protagonist was moving there, she remembered the conversation she had with Idea, who told her that she would give the girl some of her power in honor of the contract between them, and that it would be enough in the future, although the amount of magic was quite small, but still it would be useful to her. Then she explained that she could not move with the girl because of the limitations in magic, but said that when Nia Polly entered this world, she would have to go to the Dragon Warrior, her contractor. The protagonist found herself in this world and thought that the place she found herself in was insanely beautiful. And it seemed to be spring there now, for it was very warm and a variety of trees unfamiliar to her were blooming. Then the girl looked at herself carefully and thought that she still couldn't believe that she was in this strange world to protect her own, and she couldn't believe that everything had happened so fast. But then she shifted her gaze to her feet and marveled at the fact that she was able to walk on water as if she were a real goddess. But suddenly her gaze focused on the young man who had been sitting by the tree and watching her closely all this time. Nia Polly scrutinized the young man in front of her and noted that his shiny silver hair and violet eyes were like gems that looked insanely similar to ideas, and therefore she was able to find her brother easily enough. Then she thought that everything happened crazy weird and also fast because she was able to make a contract with the goddess of Eden from another world. And it was a world where Nia Polly was chosen to see dragons when others could not, and she went back in time at Eden's request to save her little brother Israel and stop the destruction of both worlds. Looking closely at the young man and also remembering the goddess Ide, the protagonist realized that no matter what in this appearance of both of them, they were absolutely identical. So it was obviously her younger brother, and they were both fantastically beautiful and such beauty she could only see in movies before. Then the protagonist excitedly looked at the young man and tried to call him to talk, but the next moment she found that the magic had dissipated. And so she fell to the bottom of the river and trying to get out was surprised that the magic could disappear so quickly. But luckily, the protagonist was not the typical protagonist from the novels she had read before with a similar plot, which was why she was a marvelous swimmer, even though she'd never been much of a sportswoman, but she had an A in that particular subject, especially since it was about her survival. But suddenly, as if Moses, the man pushed the water apart and the girl hovered in the air, not understanding what happened and how it happened. This was kindly done by Israel, who was worried that the girl might drown and suspected that she might not be able to swim, and then explained that he was only helping her because she had used magic before. When he made sure that the girl was fine and quietly appeared on the shore, he immediately turned around and began to leave, but then the protagonist asked him to stop. He did not even turn around and said that she had just reached the boundary of the diagonals and for a short time can see him, so she should just forget about it, because they will not see each other again anyway. She tried to explain something, but the man vanished the next moment, and there were shouts of joy from other people around, who ran to her with tears in their eyes to greet the protagonist. And Nia Polly was at this time absolutely shocked and did not understand who these people around and where the dragon had time to disappear and how he did it so quickly. After that, she covered her face with her hands from the realization that she would most likely be beaten to death by bandits at the very beginning of his journey. But suddenly these men, whom the girl mistakenly thought were bandits, got down on one knee and told her that according to the prophecy, the dragon warrior priests would greet the goddess protected by the divine dragon. She looked at them shocked, not knowing what they meant. But then she remembered what Idea had told her, namely that she had told the girl that she should go to the dragon warrior. She listened attentively to what they were going to tell her, and then they asked if the goddess would allow them to take her to the dragon palace. Then, having received her consent, they offered her a place on the blessed flower throne, which the protagonist did, and was insanely unhappy that she was all wrapped up in flowers and pondered that she felt as if she were cursed rather than blessed. Then awkwardly asked the young men how long it would take to get to the temple. They calmly informed me that it usually takes 3 or 4 hours to get there by forest road, but if the girl was lonely, they could kindly sing a dragon hymn for her. Then they began to hum the words that said that there was an invisible dragon that no one could catch and only the dragon goddess could see it. Nia Polly found herself thinking that while she was listening to this strange song, she slowly began to realize that everything that had happened to her was not a dream or a game. And then she took a close look at her broken phone and found that the thing was completely useless in this world as they don't work here, and then she wondered if everything would be alright as she was now in the past. And this all happened before the world was destroyed. The main character waited for her parents for an insanely long time and texted them every half hour to ask when they would arrive. She asked if they had forgotten that she was graduating today and told them that at least one of her parents had to show up. But her mother calmly apologized and said that she had completely forgotten about it. Polly didn't say anything to this and thought about the fact that her father hadn't even checked the messenger where she had written the message. After which she sadly realized that she had nothing to worry about since she had never been close to her family, since they didn't even see each other every day. And also the girl had absolutely no idea if she had any friends, because even though she was in the same high school class with some of the guys, they weren't that close. but afterwards they were in the same high school class again. Thinking of all this, Polly decided to make all appearances in this place, and it would be much better than the old one, for she would be really special in this world just by virtue of staying here and fulfilling her duties. So she must live an exquisite, wonderful life, after a short but still hard work in the past. Then the protagonist thought about the fact that she has a chance to get rich because for helping Eden and Israel, they will definitely reward her with a huge amount of money. And she can stand the richest unemployed girl, or she can meet the prince of these lands and also fall in love with him. After which the next moment happily sat on the throne and laughed at herself for thinking about it so seriously. After which allowed herself this momentary weakness due to the fact that such thoughts did cause some excitement. After thinking about it for some more time, the protagonist came to the conclusion that a prince is too big a burden, so she was funny to read about empresses. But she would definitely not want to be one of them and would most likely prefer some duke or perhaps a rich earl to have a good time with him. Or at the very least a baron. But a friend of the protagonist noticed something insanely huge in front of her that literally blocked out the sun, causing everything around her to be in shadow. It was a huge-ass ogre, who the next moment completely unnoticed the protagonist did the necessary deeds. The priests in panic began to gasp and fall to their feet, but the elder among them said that it was only ogre gases, so the priests should remain calm and not panic. Then ordered each of them to raise their weapons, although I awkwardly admitted that this sort of thing smells quite toxic, after which I turned to the orc to ask what he ate today, because it stank insanely bad. He didn't seem to pay any attention to such questions from the priest, so he scratched his ear unhappily and went about his business, which he had been doing before. Then the priest turned to the main character and asked how the lady was feeling. She awkwardly remarked that she seemed to be gradually getting used to such things. The priest admitted that it was insanely hard to get used to such things. Although the gas was harmless to the human body, its odor was quite ammoniacal and unpleasant. But the next moment all the priests stood up, covering the protagonist, and informed that Polly need not worry as the priests will disarm the ogre in no time and take the goddess to the temple in complete safety, so they can handle it, even despite the legendary size of the ogre, and it won't be able to resist their faith. But in the next moment, the ogre, with one slight sweep of his arm, caused the most senior of the priests to fly far into the sky, followed only by Canic's quiet screams. All this was watched from below by 3 other young men who, after a short scream, went after the head priest. As a result, the girl was left under the protection of only a few young men who covered her so that the ogre could not harm her. Tom, resolutely taking up his staff, said that all the remaining priests needed to urgently gather and unite their magic. So they did and linked their wands together to create an insanely powerful energy, and it seemed that each of them was really shocked that they had gotten such a spell. The next moment, they concentrated all their attention on the enemy and directed at him their decisive blow of what they believed to be crushing force. But he only froze a part of the ogre's stomach. The priests, looking at this, were madly happy that they had succeeded, and then began to think that they should freeze the rest of the ogre. But the one seemed to be only angered by such a prank on the part of the young people, and so with anger she broke the ice they had previously conjured up. The other young priests were shocked and didn't understand how he was able to overcome their magic so quickly. But everyone knew that they absolutely could not give up, because then the goddess they had been waiting for would be hurt. Then the girl turned to them and told the young men that they should attack his arms and legs, and when he lost his balance, they should attack his head or run away. But in the end, the ogre still managed to cope with almost all the priests, after which he stretched out his paws to the protagonist, wanting to eat her, and the one in a panic running away thinking that madly would like to be saved rather than die such a stupid death. But in the end, it was still grabbed by the ogre, but suddenly an insanely bright light shone out from under his fist, and everyone immediately realized that this light was a sign of divine power. Then the protagonist remembered how Idea had given her divine powers and told her that she wanted to grant her powers so that the girl could protect herself, but that in order for Polly's body to hold up, Idea was only giving her a small amount of magic, but it would still prove useful. In the end, the augur and the other priests are shocked to discover that the main character has literally disappeared as if she never existed. She stood between the two priests as they anxiously searched for her, and Jerry literally wept as he realized that the goddess they had been waiting for 1,000 years had been turned into powder at the hands of an ogre. The girl was insanely embarrassed that she was making the young men so worried. But afterward, she thanked Eden with tears of joy in her eyes for giving her such a marvelous power of invisibility as her own. For now that she was invisible, she could dance any dance or even sing, and no one would notice her. And besides, the others couldn't even hear her voice. After which she began to think about what she should do and pondered the possibility of a solitary escape, for it would probably bring her more success. But afterwards, she realized that she couldn't just run away, because all these people were trying to protect her at the cost of their lives. So such an act on her part would be insanely cowardly. Then the protagonist began to think about what she could do, and stated that since childhood, she was not particularly good at anything, because she tried a little more than average and strived to get the highest grade, and tried to win the school modeling contest, because praise was nice for her, but she didn't want to do anything in particular. So it was more like stepping up a level in some game. Then the protagonist, in a panic, began to think about the fact that she likes games and dreams. So with such meager knowledge, she tried to think of a solution to defeat this evil ogre. But her musings had gone on for too long, so the ogre had already grabbed one of the priests and pulled him to his mouth. He tried as hard as he could to break free and scream for help. In the next moment, the protagonist did not think long and immediately ran to the staff, which was previously used by this priest, and realized that this is what she needed, because no one cannot calmly endure the pain of needle prick. Then, scrutinizing the giant in front of her, the girl began to think about where she should strike. She could hit the foot, maybe the shin, but the eyes were too high for her. She wouldn't be able to reach it in time. But then she mentally scolded herself for not having time to think, so she'd have to make it up as she went along. Then she tried to convince herself that she could do it anyway. After which she reflected that she knew the weakness of any living organism, much less an ogre. Even though he was huge, she realized she could give him a jab in the buttock. The main character was thinking that maybe it was because of the enhancement that idea had given her, because she now had a strength and speed that was impossible in the real world. She knocked the ogre down like a shot. All of this was watched by the admiring priests, who pondered that the goddess had just defeated the ogre, and after her disappearance, the weapon flew and attacked the ogre on its own. Then, remembering the girl, the priests came to the conclusion that the girl who could use such rare magical abilities was chosen by God himself. So she was truly incredible and worth all the millennia of waiting for her. Then Polly realized with embarrassment that the picture looked quite different to them, for from their side the needle had actually flown up by itself, after which it wounded the ogre. But after two men carefully looking around them informed the girl that she could already show herself and called Polly as soon as they could to attract her attention. And she stood awkwardly right in front of them and realized that she did not understand how she could stop the action of her power. She was madly embarrassed because of this, and Nia Polly was obviously nervous, because the men could not even hear her voice. But suddenly, the idea came into her head that they were from the same world, so most likely she could write to them, and everyone should be able to understand the writing perfectly. So the girl resolutely raised a wooden stick and then made a couple of waves in order to attract attention. Priests, with admiration, looking at it, immediately realized only that the girl thus uses her village. Then she awkwardly bent down and started scratching a message on the ground with them, which stated that she wasn't very good at writing skills and warned that she would be following along with them in the form of a twig in the future. Everyone happily agreed and indicated that they understood her intentions. Whereupon Nia Polly inquired what would happen to those priests who had previously flown away. But the Tom calmly explained that it would be a wise enough decision on their part to go for backup and go on a search. After that, turning to the side of the protagonist, said that the girl absolutely should not worry about it, as some priests who had previously been defeated huge likely to come to the destination even before they themselves. After that, turning to the protagonist, he asked her to twirl a twig if she understood what he wanted to say, and the girl complied with the request. Behind it all was Jerry, who was watching the soaring twig from the side. Then Tom leaned over the ogre and said that he doubted that such a giant could die from a staff, for he was really too big, so they would have to hurry. After that, looking into the wilds of the forest, he thought that there would probably be a lot more stubborn people here than there had been before due to the appearance of the main character. After seeing all those sinister eyes from the forest, all three people ran with great speed in the direction the priests were pointing. Finally, they reached the evening, and then suddenly for Neapoli, as well as the two priests in front of the temple itself in the moonlight, she shone slightly, and magic enveloped her from head to toe. The girl in shock, looking around herself, did not understand. Is it now using real magic, which previously she had only read about in books? But suddenly, to the surprise of Neapoli, as well as Tom and Jerry, the priest appeared before them and said that he was madly glad that they had managed to get there because he was worried about them. And all three of them shrieked with joy, not believing that the head priest had actually survived after such a blow. But the man smiled and said that he could not die because they were in a fictional story, and then turning to Neapoli, said that the archbishop was waiting for her, so the girl should go to him. After which the man said that first the girl should cheer up a little and rest before meeting him. When the protagonist went deeper into the temple, she noticed several beautiful shining statues and realized that apparently these statues in such a temple act as lamps. But suddenly Neapoli remembered idea and wondered if she would meet this girl again, for she would like her to teach her how to handle her new power, which had been completely unknown to her until then. Having looked at the head priest attentively, I asked him what kind of person the archbishop of this temple really is. At this moment, the archbishop himself was taking a bath in a prayerful posture, praying for the health of the newly arrived goddess in this world, and then thought that to see the goddess in his life is the greatest blessing of God for him. Whereupon he rose from his seat and asked the servants to bring him his gold collection. Then he scrutinized several beautiful and exquisite wigs in front of him. The archbishop thought that the absolute did not know which of all these wigs would please the goddess the most. As a result, Neapoli and the archbishop met in the temple of worship of the dragon warrior, and the one who bowed to the protagonist greeted her with her arrival in this world and called her chosen by God himself, introduced himself as the archbishop of this temple. His name was Alexander Kakuri. Neapoli was quite excited and embarrassed by this acquaintance and informed Mr. that he was insanely handsome, then awkwardly inquired, is that really his last name? The goddess smiled shiftingly and said that this was the name he had been given at his baptism and that it was a bit difficult for others to pronounce. Remembering the smiling girl, Neapoli absolutely could not understand how Ide had gotten the idea to call such a beautiful man by such an inappropriate name. But at that moment, she was distracted from her thoughts by the archbishop, who came closer and asked the girl that she had said earlier that this language was the same as in her world. Then he wanted to know if the girl knew what his surname meant. She awkwardly said that she knew it, but she was surprised because she knew the words so well. He literally shone looking at the girl in front of him and asked what his surname actually meant. The girl carefully tried to explain that his name meant literally elephant. Then Neapoli calmly explained that his name in her language means a very big and strong and wise animal, but after upsetting the already happy archbishop, the main character said that this animal has an insanely long nose that looks like a hand. The latter anxiously inquired whether such animals have their hands on their faces. But suddenly, to the surprise of the archbishop and the protagonist, there was a burst of laughter from Idea. Alexander did not hear her, but he was surprised by the reaction of the goddess. Idea turned to the protagonist and asked why she was explaining such things to the archbishop. Looking around, Neapoli managed to notice a girl on one of the statues, and she smiled brightly and looked at the protagonist and said that she didn't think the girl could come so early. But the archbishop seemed to be completely oblivious to this goddess as to the rest of the world. So turning to Polly, he asked why she was abruptly silent. But at the next moment there was a blow, and the goddess made the archbishop unconscious, and the wave that had previously covered his bald head slipped off his head. The girl was really shocked. But at that moment there was laughter from Hideo, who embarrassedly remarked that every time people noticed the archbishop's bald head, they were madly surprised. But she looked at her from head to toe and wondered why she had such a strange reaction to the fact that the man had fainted. But she calmly grabbed the girl by the shoulders and began to lead her and said that they need to talk about the girl who will save the world. That is, about the protagonist. But she looked at Archbishop Alexander Kokiria and said that they urgently need to check if he is dead. But she calmly said that the man should wake up in a couple of minutes. They sat down happily and began their conversation, when Idea said that she had learned from the priests that the girl had already been able to defeat the ogre with the power she had been given. Neapoli said with a smile on her face that she had managed to defeat it in one blow. But she still hadn't learned how to use magic properly. The heroine tried to convince Idea to teach her how to use magic, but she calmly explained that the girl could learn it herself, especially since she had never shared her power with anyone before. And in fact, this was her first time using magic to break through what time and space, and unlike her brother, Ide needed to consider different conditions to use her power. So she asked the protagonist for help. Then the protagonist said that she had already realized that her mission was to save her brother and protect both worlds. She confirmed the girl's words and then touched her forehead with her finger and said that she wanted to show her the truth about the destruction of the world. Then the protagonist and learned that in fact Idea and Israel, invisible dragons, last brother and sister, and no matter how strong and beautiful they were, the two twins remained transparent and invisible, and all living creatures could feel or see their presence only on the verge of death before losing their breath. People saw only the manifestations of their power and praised them as gods. Recalling this Idea confessed that it was madly amusing to watch from the outside. Then she continued that for many years Idea and Israel had enjoyed their greatness. Idea was interested in serving the people and led them to many prophecies. And her brother Israel was interested in nature and created the 4 seasons on the continent with powerful magic, and they were the rulers of a perfect world. Until the girl showed up. Idea had absolutely no idea when or where this girl had met Israel, nor did she know when she had managed to fall in love with Israel. But there came a point when Idea did learn of her existence, and it was not a good introduction. Then she was shocked looking at her brother. She wondered why he was behaving like this and why he was turning the capital into a sea of fire. He calmly greeted his sister and told her that it had been 300 years since their last meeting. Then he explained that the girl wanted this town to disappear. After a while, he proceeded to fulfill her wish, and the entire town literally turned to hell on earth. After a time, he destroyed the whole country, and his behavior, Israel explained that the girl wanted it very much, and she wants this country to disappear. After that, it happened, and in just 3 days, the great empires and superpowers of the continent disappeared. So the next time Idea saw him continuing his destruction, she wondered if he was talking about wanting to destroy the whole world. No matter how many times Idea asked, she never got an answer. And in the end, her brother, all he did instead of answering her questions was just cry, destroying the whole world they had previously created together. And in his arms was the very girl he did it all for. The protagonist recoiled in horror and looked at Ide worriedly, wondering why he was holding a dead girl and how it was that the girl looked exactly like herself. The reason for the resemblance was that this girl was actually the protagonist from the other world, and that by destroying that world, her brother had taken more than half of Idea's power to open the door to that dimension. So after destroying that world, her brother took more than half of Idea's power to open the door to that dimension, and then told Neapoli that she had actually now returned to her home world where she had originally lived. After that, she said that the moment her brother opened the gate and began to destroy the world she was in, Idea followed Israel. And at that moment, when she saw the main character, she realized the reason why the guy was able to fall in love with her. That was a really special soul because she could see them. And her brother crossed the dimension because he wanted to meet her again. The protagonist thought about it and decided it sounded like a romantic fantasy. But after a more disgruntled glance at Idea asked why. In that case, she was nearly run over by a building when Israel went on a rampage. She said with a smile on her face that it was an accident, and the main thing was that she hadn't run her over. Then the protagonist unhappily crosses her arms in front of her and wonders if her brother was dumped by a bad girl, so he went crazy. And Idea says that this girl is actually her. But she apologized for rushing to tell her all this and told Neapoli that they shouldn't worry about the details for now. After all, the most important thing was to save both worlds. After that, with tears in her eyes, looked at the thoughtful protagonist and wondered if she had accidentally said something wrong and said that if it really happened, she was insanely sorry for her behavior. Protagonist, looking at this girl, absolutely did not understand why even in such moments she was insanely beautiful, although just talking to her. Then she said that she didn't know how much time was left before the world was destroyed. But she was sure that her brother hadn't met her in this world yet, because that was the condition of her magic. Then the protagonist looked worriedly at Eden and asked what she meant when she said, "in this world," because now he felt like a double. But she calmly said that perhaps the girl who met his brother in the past had not yet been born. But afterward, her look became more serious, and turning to Polly, she said that the only thing she really wanted to ask of her was to save her brother. Then the protagonist had already envisioned a picture of how she would offer Israel to befriend her, thus saving him from all the terrible events and mistakes in his future that he might make. But the protagonist was clearly unhappy about this and said that she didn't want to think about it and that it wasn't her goal. After hearing this comment from the protagonist, Idea calmed down and then stopped talking. At this point, the protagonist was ruminating on whether both worlds would really be saved if she could save her brother. She smiled happily and said that there was no doubt about it. She asked if the protagonist thought her brother was handsome, but she calmly looked at her face and said that she had already seen him near the lake and thought he was a handsome young man. She asked if they had already met. Nia Polly, remembering his cold face, said that their meeting happened by chance because the guy saved her and just left, and he was insanely similar to Eden, so she immediately recognized him. Idea was literally shining with joy and said that she had never doubted the main character for a second. As expected, she made the right choice when she decided that she was the chosen one. But then she tearfully confessed that her brother Israel was an incredible guy, but insanely lonely. And knowing his nature, the girl wasn't sure they would meet at least a few times in the next few hundred years. Afterward, her face contorted in shock, and she wondered if Idea really meant hundreds of years, and it wasn't a figurative statement. Then she told the girl that it would be a difficult task, for she would be old and dead by then, not to mention her friends who were waiting for her in the other world. Ta thought sadly that if it was true, she would have to find another Polly, but she wasn't sad about that at all. She was embarrassed by the fact that the rest of her powers and magic weren't that great, and so the situation annoyed her. The protagonist sees the girl's face so relaxed that it gives her the creeps. She waved her hand to reassure the protagonist and said that the girl should not worry because previously Nia Polly had already met him once without the help of Eden, so it's really their fate is connected. And then you see the shocked face of the protagonist, who said that if Nia Polly was good to you, they could see each other often. But she thought that for some reason she had some strange bad feeling. At that moment, Idea excitedly announced that she had forgotten to turn off the gas at home, so she had to get back before it exploded. Nia Polly was literally terrified and shouted after her that if the girl was going to lie to her, she should have done it more believably. But she flew away and told Nia Polly that if she wanted to, she could live here with all the comforts of home, because she was a proclaimed goddess who could or would live for 1,000 years. The girl jumped to her feet and asked what the girl meant by taking care of her brother, since she couldn't even meet him for centuries to come. But not even a minute later, the girl started to call out to Ida in a more desperate manner, asking her to come back and explain how she could do something like this alone. In the end, after a month, the protagonist reflected on the fact that basically herself she had gotten quite a lot as promised by Idea, because she was now surrounded by a handsome archbishop, as well as loyal priests who will do whatever she tells them to, namely Tom and Jerry. The girl was glad that in this life she didn't have to worry as much as in her previous life. Because jewelry from hundreds of priests containing divine power, elegant dresses, and walks in the beautiful garden of the temple were her status. The girl happily sipped her tea, thanking Ida for letting the girl stay here and just enjoy her life. Then she was taken out of her thoughts by Tom, who came up to her and offered her a taste of her dessert, a freshly picked strawberry, and told her that it was a special product they had received from a distant relative of the archbishop. Neopoli was overjoyed and said that the dessert really did look delicious, so she wanted to personally thank the archbishop for it. In spite of all her restraint, Neopoli was very happy about this new life because she was not bored with it even after a month of living like this. And the new life of full wealth seemed to her insanely exciting, so it was hard to think of anything better. So if Neopoli continues to play, eat, and sleep every day, then nothing else is needed from this life. There will be no worries about college exams, no worries about her future job. Some time passed, and after finishing the tea, the girl immediately ran up to the archbishop and greeted him and thanked Alexander Kokyria for treating her with strawberries, and said that she liked them very much. The latter, with a smile on his face, admitted to the girl that it was a great honor for him to hear that the strawberries provided by him came to the taste of the goddess. Then he said that Neopoli had been here for a month, so he was glad that the girl had settled in well. On that grateful, smiling Alexander Kokyria said that all this is possible only thanks to him and also to the priests. But then he announced to the protagonist's great shock that he was going to introduce the girl to the palace. She was literally terrified. I don't know what she'd heard right once. Then she pictured a picture of a typical palace and wondered if he was referring to the imperial palace where the emperor lives. Alexander Kokyria calmly explained that she would officially take her first step towards the prophecy of their holy empire. The protagonist calmly informed her that she didn't think she was ready for something like this so soon, but he bowed low before her, excitedly apologized, and informed her that in fact a month ago when Neopoli arrived, he was so excited that he got drunk and informed the palace of her arrival. The girl was literally shocked and wondered how he could do such a thing, but he handed her a scroll and said that it was the answer that came from the imperial palace. The girl unfolded it and began to read it and was just horrified by what was written, because she had been invited to the imperial palace. After which, excitedly turned to Alexander Kokyria and inquired, is he not trusted in this empire? At this time, in the imperial palace of the Holy Empire gathered all the aristocrats, and then the king announced that, as everyone knows, in the Temple of the Dragon was a lot of prophecies, but none of the prophecies have not been fulfilled until now, because everyone talked about hundreds of thousands and tens of thousands of years, so they could not see the results. So asked the comer what he meant when he spoke of a new dragon goddess appearing out of nowhere. The aristocrats began to talk among themselves and wondered if there had ever been such a prophecy, but one of them was convinced that such a prophecy had indeed been spoken of. Then the man bowed before the king and told his lordship that the prophecy had been recognized. The nobles only discussed the fact that the archbishop of the Dragon Temple was incredibly handsome, and the young men did not understand how it was possible to appoint Alexander Kokyria, such a handsome young man from the church, as archbishop. At this point, interrupting their conversations, the informant assured them that if the Dragon Temple was recognized, the empire would be under the dragon's protection, and so they could avoid war and famine. And so, although he doesn't know if it's a coincidence or not, but their empire has been living peacefully for hundreds of years since the last war, so looking closely at the emperor, the man said that now, for unknown reasons, there are disasters, and the locals have started saying that the emperor is neglecting the temple. He looked at the speaker carefully and said that if everyone ignored it, then it was likely that such an attitude to the news would cause unrest among the inhabitants. Then he looked carefully at the man in front of him and said that if this goddess was really going to save the world from destruction, then she must have incredibly great abilities. Then he said that if the goddess could demonstrate her abilities by preventing the disaster, then he would officially recognize their temple. At this point, the protagonist, screaming with rage, informed Alexander Kokyria that she is having trouble using invisibility magic, so she can't stop the flood as well as the earthquake, especially since there were even more disasters than just these two, and inquired of Alexander Kokyria, why does the emperor have such silly conditions, and why does she have to control both air and water and fire and earth and mind, and inquired, is this some kind of cartoon in the fantasy genre? But suddenly, the head priest appeared out of nowhere and said that this is the case, and the protagonist was not mistaken in her guesses. But at that moment, he was cut off from the goddess Alexander Kokyria and asked the head priest to stop talking nonsense. Then looked at the main character and said that Neopoli can make all the impossible possible, so the girl should just be braver. But then, to her horror, Alexander Kokiri added that otherwise the girl would be hanged for blasphemy. She only thought that she wanted madly to return to her ruined world. The two men who were restraining her asked the girl to calm down as soon as possible, and then informed her that the goddess was their last hope. The next day, the protagonist rode in her carriage in tears and was dressed up like a flower in the snow. But anyway, she was taken to the village. Neapoli admitted to herself that she tried to escape until the priest showed her the temple's ledger, which literally gave Neapoli a shock. And after looking at the archbishop and the two priests, who were literally weeping, Alexander Kokiria said that the truth was that all the luxury they provided to the goddess was destroying private property and also the income of the priests. Tom reported that the meat the girl had eaten yesterday was the last chicken in the temple. Then he held out a small chicken to her and told her that he was the only one left. Neapoli was horrified and tearfully pitying the little creature. Then Tom explained that all this was due to the fact that the imperial family had neglected the temple for a long time. At this, Neapoli realized from her seat and resolutely inquired about the donations. But he calmly explained that the donations went to help the poor and that the temple was in need of major repairs. Polly thought that she felt like Cinderella after midnight, who had no magic left. She thought that the luxurious, carefree life she had gotten with her assignment, but in fact tomorrow it would all be over. But just sadly reported that it was to be expected since nothing in this world is free and her troubles were just beginning. But on her arrival in the village, the villagers greeted her cheerfully and seemed madly happy to see her arrive. Main village looking at all this picture thinking that it was the first time she was performing in front of such a huge number of people, so she was insanely nervous and began to stutter. The girl was literally shaking with nervousness, not understanding why Tom and Jerry brought her to this place while she was sitting in the wagon. Whereupon she recalled facing bullying at school when they started making fun of her for having the wrong pronunciation and making her look like a loser. And these thoughts made the girl panic every time, and she didn't know how to behave. But then she noticed a resident of the city who smiled at her and said that her performance was really beautiful, and she was madly happy that this girl was their new goddess. Other residents said that they were madly honored to meet her in the city and asked her to stay as long as possible. Later, the village elder took Polly to her room and ordered the servants to unpack her luggage. Sitting on her bed, Neapoli thought about the fact that it was a rather ordinary room, but the bed was very soft, and it must have been the villagers who made sure that the girl was comfortable, and the protagonist wanted to repay them madly for the way they met her. So she looked at her assistant and asked what problems there were in this town. He calmly smiled and said that this village was the site of one of the calamities called Windy. At this time, Israel was watching this village from above and a huge typhoon was circling around him, and he seemed to be furious about the behavior of the people of this village and thought that these people are always avoiding even themselves and afraid to admit to themselves how rotten they are on the inside. Then the protagonist excitedly looked at Tom's priest and asked him what he meant by wind disaster. He calmly explained that lately there have been small and large typhoons near the village, and he had even heard that everything in the agricultural area and the new buildings supported by the imperial palace were being destroyed, and added that such storms cause significant damage to the villagers. The protagonist thought about it and realized that if the problem is the typhoon, then it will not be the easiest task. Then reported that the problem is that she cannot even afford to cause a little rain, and even less to talk about controlling the wind, because so far all the girl had is the only skill of invisibility and became invisible by magic and then turned back with the help of bright moonlight. But having looked at it carefully, I will inform you that according to my assumptions, the typhoon in this place turned out to be a trap and not a natural phenomenon, because hundreds of years have passed without typhoons or droughts. But despite the weather, someone must be controlling this storm. Neapoli asked him to explain what he meant. Then he began his story and said it was just a guess. But the wizards of the present belong to the imperial family, but some still continue their activities in different places. And if it was magic, there would be some traces somewhere in this city. Then the protagonist decisively appeared at the door and said that in that case, they should go out as soon as possible and find those traces that would point to the culprit. But as soon as she opened the door, she saw a little excited girl with a beautiful bouquet of flowers. She thanked the goddess for visiting their city. And after handing her the flowers, she asked them to accept them as she herself had personally picked them in the mountains. After which she smiled and introduced herself. The girl was named Mary, and she frantically asked the main character for her autograph. Behind her from nowhere appeared a bunch of children who also asked her for autographs, and the main character in shock did not understand whether all of them so much admire her. But at that moment, a man appeared behind her back and told her that he had foreseen such a situation in advance, so he bought her a pen so that she could sign all the necessary papers. The girl thought about the fact that she was extremely shy because she had never done it before, and mentally asked herself if she could just write her name as an autograph. At the same time, excited children asked to write an autograph for their parents and loved ones. As soon as the first boy got his autograph, he was happy that this piece of paper could be worth his monthly salary, but the other child was adamant that it was much more valuable. After all, this is the first version of the autograph, so this is probably payment for 3 whole months of work. But at that moment, Mary took charge of all the children and told them that they should sell a tip that the divine lady had divine power, and then they would become insanely rich. Then they ran away happily. Looking at this whole picture, Tom thought that children are always crazy amazing and fun to watch. But the protagonist is excited to look up at him and asked if there's anything else they can do to help these kids since they're still frantically worrying about food. He said that if it's okay with the ladies, they can split their travel expenses and buy a food cart. She literally lit up at the idea and said that she was very happy about this decision because then she could help poor children who were starving. Looking at Goddess Polly, Tom confessed that he felt that the girl in front of her was an insanely cute person, then explained that the protagonist was quite restless, even though they couldn't protect her properly from the crisis. And also the protagonist didn't run away during the battle with the giant and came here on behalf of the emperor, and is also going to distribute things to children she has never seen before. And so, as a dragon priest can confidently say that it is natural to consider her noble, whereupon he bent down on one knee and joyfully announced that he was greatly honored to be a priest who faithfully served the goddess Neapoli and solemnly swore that he would support her with all his might and in all ways with the spirit of a dragon priest that transcends chivalry. The protagonist was maddeningly embarrassed by this sort of scrutinizing of the clergy before her. All she could do was gratefully utter his name. Then she remembered herself in the past and realized that the modern Neapoli was just an ordinary hard-working girl without anything noteworthy, although she could rather be called an outcast who didn't even work to make social connections. But she was pleased to think that maybe there was some small chance that she was special, just like in some novel she had read. So smiling brightly at Tom, she thanked him for such warm words and told him that she too was looking forward to their future collaboration. But suddenly, there was a huge whirlwind outside the window that literally blew the roof of the house off and carried it somewhere far away. The main character is not happy, stuck in a typhoon, thinking about the fact that not even 3 seconds have passed since she considered herself especially in this world and already found herself in the epicenter of the hurricane, after which she began to pray to literally all the gods of this world and said that she will definitely go to school and also will write all the tests and correct herself and will work hard for the good of society and ask God to save her. But suddenly she noticed Tom in front of her, who was in a meditation pose, and in a panic she started shouting to him to help her. But then she noticed that with each passing second he was getting farther and farther away, so she almost cried, begging the man not to leave her, and in panic she didn't understand whether she would die like this. But suddenly in her head came the voice of Tom, who asked if she could hear him and then said that he had established a telepathic link between them that would last only a minute. So she asked the girl to listen as carefully as possible, and then with the most serious face said that even if the protagonist is frightened, she must concentrate because only in this case, everyone will be able to survive, because besides them right now in the captivity of the hurricane are other inhabitants. But they're all protected by Ms. Nia's holy power. Polly, that surprised, asked what he meant. Then he asked the girl to turn around and look at the other inhabitants and said that before the goddess did it all unconsciously, and if she looked around she could check and see for herself. Then she found many people flying around who were actually protected by some kind of bluish aura. Then Tom reported that it was thanks to the goddess, who was the child of God, that anyone could be in a strong hurricane without getting a scratch. But even so, they just keep flying around like crazy. So since they don't know when the shield will expire before it does, they should set up a Hurricane U. The protagonist is filled with determination, realizing that she is not as useless as she thought she was. And so she asks Tom what she can do to help stop the storm. He says he believes in the protagonist and that she can do it. Then was about to explain to her exactly how to use her magic, but in a shock to her, the connection broke at that moment. Then the protagonist was literally filled with rage, remembering Ide, who brought her to this world, only to have the girl deal with her brother instead of her. Alexandra Kokiria, who completely failed to notice how he managed to inform the palace drunkenly that she appeared in this world. As well as Tom, who simply asked to stop his hurricane and also did not say the most important thing. She was literally terrified and informed that to each of them she will return her torment back in pleasure. But then she realized her worried look above and then noticed Israel in front of her, who was steering this hurricane and conjuring up something. Polly did not understand why he was here, but afterwards she guessed that he was the cause of these people's distress, so she waved and tried to attract his attention. And finally, after a few tries, she succeeded, and the man turned his bored look on her and then turned his head away. Nia Polly, looking at this whole picture with embarrassment, wondered if Israel was trying to pretend he didn't know her. But at that moment, she could not stand it any longer, and so, with all the fury on which she was calm, she informed him that the man had better not make her angry, for absolutely everything that had happened to her was his fault. For the destruction had happened because Israel had decided to experiment and had destroyed the modern world. At that moment, the girl told Israel with all the fury she could muster that he was just a jerk and a pathetic loser and called him an evil lizard. He seemed surprised, but didn't react. Then the main character tearfully said that he was also a pervert and called him a dickhead. He didn't expect to hear that from this girl, so his face was contorted with shock and not understanding how he should deal with her at this moment. So the best idea was to get her out of the hurricane and away from the hurricane. He looked at her with a cold and threatening look in his eyes and wondered why she was still bothering him. He had saved her life earlier, so he didn't understand her motives. Then he said that if a girl wanted to die, she should do it as beautifully as everyone else. The girl, listening to all this, was still trying to stop his hand that was clutching her throat and prevent her from strangling herself as soon as possible. Then she hissed that the guy was just crazy and said that absolutely no one dies beautifully. After that, to his horror, she said that if the boy did not calm down now, he would regret his deed. But afterwards, he took a calmer look at Polly and said that she was obviously not on the edge of the abyss. And having lowered her to the ground, he asked how such a thing was possible, and then he approached her and scrutinized her face, trying to study every smallest detail of her appearance. But the next moment, to Israel's great shock, a slap flew into his face from the main character, who informed him that not only could she see him, but she could also hit him, and called him a jerk. He awkwardly pressed his hand to the bump on his cheek to report that the girl was the first to be able to hit him. She wiped her tears and looked at Israel and said that it was obvious, because you can't hit someone you can't see at all. But then the guy sadly said that she was the only one after his sister. Polly, remembering how idea had struck Alexander Kokiryu, thought that if she were that girl, she would have done the same to her younger brother. But after a flustered look at him, she apologized for such words. For the realization that this guy was being beaten by his own sister came not a moment too late. At this point, Israel looked at the girl carefully without paying attention and informed her that she was the only one who could see him. So now he finally realized that she was this person who had been protecting the little people who had been caught in the typhoon all this time, and wondered how she had been able to do it. At that moment, a light breeze blew, which began to develop the main character's hair, which was colored scarlet red at the ends. Looking at the protagonist, Israel was really shocked and asked the girl, how was she able to absorb the power of Ide? Because it had been a long time since he had destroyed everyone who was capable of it, and wondered if he had missed her. Then Polly calmly waved her hands and told him that the boy shouldn't worry so much about the slap and asked him to let her explain herself. After that, she calmly told him everything that had happened from the beginning, because her original goal was to become his friend and help him not to go off the right path. And then the girl thought that in any case, she should not have doubted her actions, because she told everything as it was because she wanted to do so. After After her story, she scrutinized Israel in front of her and asked him what he thought about it. But he said that what had happened was new to him and that he had never met anyone as crazy as him. He told her, to the displeasure of the protagonist, that she was a crazy girl, but that she was capable enough. But she was furious and said that she had literally living proof of her words in the form of red-dyed hair. She said that she had literally living proof of her words in the form of red-dyed hair, especially since he himself had said earlier that his sister's power was in that hair and that she had given it to her. But he calmly gazed into the distance and told Nia Polly that he believed in her words and her story. But he did not care at all how the girl could see him. He just wondered that he could go mad with love for her. She agreed with him and said she was also insanely amazed by such a fact, then added that technically it wasn't her, but her version from another world, so it didn't count in any way. After looking at his face, I asked him to stop looking at people with those beautiful eyes. He was clearly embarrassed by such an inconspicuous compliment. Then Polly, not paying attention to his embarrassment, pointed to the typhoons walking through the city and in a commanding tone told Israel to stop talking and also to stop these as soon as possible, for she was madly worried and going mad. At this time, the circling Tom and the typhoon as well as the residents prayed that the protagonist would remember to save them. Israel listened to her, and as a result, the inhabitants who had been circling in the wind began to slowly descend to the ground, and he only seeing it stated that this time these people were extremely lucky, because not a single hair had fallen from their heads. Looking at this picture, the man asked if the main character was happy. She thanked him and confirmed his guesses, whereupon he looked over Polly and inquired, does she wish to become his friend in order to save the world? She confirmed his words and then holding out her hand said her name was Nia Polly and asked the guy to take care of her. That someone smiled strangely looking at the protagonist and said that he would give the girl exactly 7 days to leave this place. And on the morning of the 8th day, this city will disappear from the map. She wondered shockedly why he was saying something like that and wondered if he was planning another typhoon to kill everyone and wondered excitedly if Israel really didn't want to be friends with her. But he calmly gazed into the landscape and said he considers the protagonist his friend, so he tells her how to survive, so she won't die because he only values his friends. The guy said that he had a reason why he was doing this, and he was giving the protagonist a choice. Either she gave him a reason why he shouldn't destroy this city, or she should just leave it. The next moment he vanished and the girl looked around unhappily for him, not sure why he had left so abruptly. But the next moment she literally exploded with anger and reproachfully told Israel that he should have at least taken her to the city and called him an annoying lizard. The one immediately apologized and appeared beside her, after which gently realized her in his arms. And the protagonist, indignantly looking at him, asked her as soon as possible to lower her to the ground because she is afraid of heights. But he, indignantly looking at the girl in his arms, asked why she was afraid, because recently she was in a typhoon, so now in his arms she has nothing to worry about. But she indignantly replied that in this case, the guy should hug her tighter, and he does not understand what she feels at this time. Awkward pictures immediately appeared in his imagination, and he didn't know how to react at all. He teleported sharply and told the protagonist that he was ready to let her go to the ground. The latter looked at the guy and thanked him for such an act. As soon as she was down, Tom and Jerry came running up to her, tearfully rejoicing that Nia Polly was all right and thanking her for surviving. After which madly cheerfully approached her, admiring that they had such a consummate goddess, and informed her that they loved her madly. But she yelled at them not to run to her and not to love her because she was sick of it all. But then she calmed down dramatically when the two young men clasped her in their tight, friendly embrace, thereby calming her down after the stress she'd been through. Israel was watching all this from a bird's eye view and smiled happily, watching the protagonist, and then reminded her of what would happen in 7 days, and then said that the protagonist should not be mistaken about the fact that if she stayed in this city, he would take pity on him. And afterwards somehow thoughtfully called the girl his friend as if he still couldn't get used to the term. Then Polly was insanely displeased, so she pointed her middle finger to the sky and thought that this guy was a real clown, and apparently he thought he was insanely noble for doing such a thing, and called him a lizard. But the next moment she was suddenly joined by 2 more priests, who were also pointing their middle fingers to the sky. The main character indignantly asked them what they were doing. But Jerry calmly explained that most likely the girl was thanking the heavens and they had decided to join her. Tom confirmed Jerry's speculation and said that was the reason he did it. And the protagonist embarrassedly asked them to forget about it and never bring it up again. Then Tom said that now that everything terrible was behind them, they should probably all eat, and Jerry agreed. And the main character, when the invisible dragon Israel flew away, decided to gather all the villagers. She was madly happy that even though Israel was able to destroy half the town in a couple of minutes, fortunately, nobody was seriously hurt. So she looked around at the people with a smile and asked them to follow her and work together from now on. Then happily announced that she would like to cook something for dinner. So the main character Tom and Jerry, under the guidance of the elder, gathered some surviving furnishings and organized a dining room in the square. And with the help of people who weren't hurt, they made a simple stew from the food they could gather. It was cooked by a man who said that he had 15 years of experience in the hotel, and in the past he was a good cook and worked in a catering company, so he was entrusted with cooking. The main character was looking around her plate quite a bit, thinking that the food looked like the food in the cartoon, and she was insanely curious what it would taste like. But as soon as they tasted it, she, Tom, and Jerry, they were shocked because it was the taste of life, fresh sweet potatoes in soup, refined to the point where they were mixed with carrots and peppers, and it all came to the tongue. And that taste and simplicity cannot be expressed in any word. It is a timeless taste that has been passed down from generation to generation since people dug up and ate the first potatoes. And it is the taste of the very ancestors. But it wasn't really as good as they described. Then Jerry remarked that for a first potato dish, it was quite good. The cook approached them embarrassed and apologized, saying that it had been a long time since he had cooked such large portions. But Nia Polly reassured him by saying that everything was delicious and thanked him for his hard work, and said that she was very pleased that they could have lunch together. Then looking around at the people who looked uncertainly at the dishes, she stated that everyone must be very hungry. But it was not a minute before the rest of the villagers joined their meal and joyfully began to eat their food and laugh and amuse themselves. Then one of the men called everyone over and offered them a taste of the wine, so the young villagers did. Then they offered the protagonist to taste with them. Although she was underage, she could not refuse, and when she tasted the drink, she found it quite tasty, and she thought about the fact that this city seemed quite warm and pleasant to her. But then she remembered the sad face of the dragon Israel, and couldn't understand why he was trying to wipe this nice place off the face of the earth. The next day, under the direction of the protagonist, had already begun to rebuild the city, and Tom, looking through the lists, reported that while he was on sick leave, he had time to prepare a lot of things, namely, a fee for living, as well as a plan for the effective reconstruction of the city. But suddenly, to her surprise, Jerry suddenly ran up, who unfolded the list and told the protagonist that she should take a look at it. And then he explained that it was a list of donations for the church from the villagers. And it looked quite amazing, as people were donating gold coins, but also fruit, bread, and a lot of other things. So now they will be able to increase the number of poultry farms at the temple. The main character, seeing such happy young guys, said that she would like to breed pigs. Then the men, to the great embarrassment of the protagonist, reported that all this was possible only because of her courageous act, so she was just great. But she awkwardly reported that she had done it unknowingly, and then realized with despair that there was no way she could tell them that they were all going to die in 2 days and that God was the reason. Remembering Israel's space, she realized that she had been trying to figure it out on her own from the beginning. But in the last 5 days, she hadn't had a single reason why Israel was actually trying to destroy the place. It was natural for the protagonist to think that this world was too much. After all, she was just an ordinary person, unless you counted the magical powers that idea had given her. But afterwards, she looked around this beautiful city with determination and thought that no matter who she was, this time she wanted to do something useful. Her concern did not go unnoticed by the priests, who inquired about what had happened to her and what was troubling her. She awkwardly said that she wondered why Israel was so eager to destroy this village. And then she was immediately shocked, realizing that she had suddenly blabbed her secret to herself. At which point all three, The protagonists, Tom and Jerry, were momentarily rendered speechless by the deepest shock. So in the end, the protagonists still had to explain everything to the two young men, and their conversation ended with the priest of the volume drinking wine, informing them that the village's disaster meant that the god was angry with them, and informed them that their church was served by the dragon goddess Ide, so they couldn't ignore her brother since he is also a sacred invisible dragon. Then the protagonist asked if there was any temple that was dedicated to Israel, to which Tom replied that there had been such temples before, but the dragon didn't pay much attention to the people. Then Jerry added that most of them had come to follow his sister Ide. But suddenly Mary broke into their conversation and said that there was a temple dedicated to the dragon on their territory. The protagonist was madly surprised and asked what she meant. Then the girl told me that there was a very old dragon temple in the woods behind the village, and there the adults served a forgotten god. Polly jumped up sharply from her seat and said that they should go and check it out as soon as possible. But as soon as they got to the place, they were met by the elder of the town, who informed them that they should leave. And Polly tried to explain to the elder that they should check the temple to stop the typhoon. But he calmly said that it had been a long time since the beasts had flooded the forest. He said that he was already late, but that he still wanted to thank the young goddess for her help, and offered her the opportunity to rest at his house tonight. The protagonist looked him over carefully and thoughtfully, and decided that he wasn't lying, but for some reason his words gave her a strange feeling. Afterwards, while in the shower, the protagonist reflected on the fact that they were treated like aristocrats, and she didn't understand why she was treated so well because she wasn't kind enough to them, and her thoughts kept returning to the forest where the Temple of Israel was now located, and she thought about how she could get into it. But after she opened her doors, she saw two young men sleeping and realized that they had been on standby too long and were therefore very tired. But afterwards she admitted to herself that it was all right since she would have had to go alone anyway. So she would become invisible and look into the forest. Eventually she did. So now, putting on her cloak, she was making her way through the thicket of the forest and thinking about taking a quick look around and enjoying the moonlight while she had the chance. At this point, she couldn't even imagine the truth that she would perfectly happen to catch a glimpse of the forest.